All right, welcome everyone. My name is Kurt. I am a comic book colorist. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I want to talk about the relationship between this wheel and this box. I got a question on a stream the other day that made me realize that I've never really explained what we're looking at when we're looking at this box here, at least on my channel. And I'll be honest, I don't know if you would call this a beginner tutorial, intermediate, or advanced, or to me, it kind of crosses over all of it. But I had a guy on a stream last week tell me that, he knew about value and he knew that his value needed to have contrast, and he would balance his values in his sketch. And then when it came time to start working with saturation or working with hue, it's like contrast made a lot more sense to him when it was value. But when you start adding the other elements into the mix, the color saturation, the hue of a color, how do you balance the contrast of all three of these different variables? Because that's really what an artist is doing, is they are balancing the contrast, the differences between the values and the saturation levels and the hues of all the colors they're choosing in order to complete, a given piece of artwork. But if you are working this way, if you are working in terms of, well, let me get my values right and then figure out the saturation, and then when I get to the hues, hopefully something makes sense. Like, if this is not something you're super comfortable with, I think this video is going to help you a lot. So first off, I kind of want to redefine contrast, okay? I know there's probably no word on my channel that I've said more than anything other than contrast. And 8 years in, may not be the best time to define it, but we're going to redefine it today, okay? And after today, I'm going to point so many questions back to this video, so which is what I hope to accomplish anyway. So first off, let's talk about what contrast is and how it actually impacts a canvas. I'm not going to disclaimer every phrase of this video with, all else being equal. You know what I mean? But we are looking at this kind of scientifically today. I want you guys to remember that what I'm giving you, the examples that I'm giving you, they're literally within the context of just what I'm giving you, okay? So let me show you what we're looking at here. This is a perfectly gray background, okay? It's 50% gray. I did that intentionally because it kind of gives you a stake in the ground to compare, is it brighter or darker than 50% gray? So this gives us like a halfway point. That's why you don't see it here on the value scale, because it's the same color, and it's why you don't see it here on the saturation. So here I have two little black canvases, let's say. Now, if I choose this value, which is pretty close to this blue value here, or this black value here. If I pick that and put that on here, you can see that against that black, okay? And the difference between that and that is the contrast. I will do this in white so we can see it. So like this right here. This is the contrast. This distance, okay, between here and here, that's contrast between here and here, okay? Now, the greater this contrast is, if I go out to here, let's take this black and compare it to this one. So we've increased this distance. We're just going from white to black here. We've increased the distance from here to here. Instead, we're going here to here. So if I pick that color and put it next to it, this color shows up more. If I back off of this, you can see, even this small, you can see the one on the right more than you can see the one on the left. And that's because our brains are drawn to increased contrast, okay? And remember, contrast is just this distance, okay? It might help to sort of purge your brain of what you believe contrast is if you're a beginner. If you hear the word contrast today and think in terms of black, white, and gray, wipe the slate clean and watch it because it'll help. The only point that I want you guys to pick up on for now is that the further apart that two values are, if you put them next to each other on a canvas, all else being equal, the one with the greater distance is going to show up more. It's going to be seen more. It's going to catch your eyeballs more. And they don't have to be just the, dark to light end of the spectrum. This stands out because it's bright, but we could do the same thing with white. So I'm going to fill both of these with white. And again, we'll make a small change from here to here. There it is. And then we'll make a bigger change from here to here. And again, this time it stands out because it's darker, okay? This is the other point that I want you to realize. Contrast does not mean the brightest thing stands out. It also doesn't mean the darkest thing stands out. It means both. Okay, it depends on what the context is. If your canvas is mostly light and you put something really dark on it, it's going to stand out. If your canvas is very dark and you put something lighter on it, it's going to stand out. And the bigger that difference is, the more difference you're going to see in how much that appears to jump off the page. Are you with me so far? Good. All right, moving on. So that's just value, okay? That is the most important variable to describe a color is value. Because we as human beings and most animals, we notice differences in value more than anything else. And that's why so many people say, hey, get your values right. So I'm going to show you a real quick illustration to show you how you could use this, in a real painting. Now, if I pick values that are closer to my background color, maybe this color and this 50% gray. So if all of the other elements in my drawing, and again, this doesn't really matter what I'm drawing. This could be building, this could be birds, people, it doesn't matter. It could be anything. But if I cover this canvas with colors that are relatively close to the background, and then choose one color that is much further away from the rest of it, that color is going to come forward, okay? It doesn't matter if it's small, it doesn't matter if it's big, it doesn't matter. It's going to come out just because it's different. It's more different than everything else. And so it's going to stand out against anything else that you have behind it that's closer to that original white background color. And we could do the same thing in reverse, obviously, with black and white. If this whole thing was dark, colors that are closer to it are not going to stand out quite as much as any color that is further away. Makes sense, right? Now, value, by the way, in this box is measured up and down. If you're watching this video, you probably know that. But light to dark, value is represented by the vertical axis on this graph of color, which is effectively what we're looking at. Saturation runs left to right, okay? And so what I did was, again, right at 50% gray, I just picked 5 colors right across the middle of the color wheel. Every single thing that I just said that applies here also applies here. And that is the contrast of saturation. So again, I'll just start on one end of the spectrum here. We'll start with the deepest red here. And again, colors that are close to this don't stand out very much compared to colors that are further away. So if I take the base red and then move over to like the halfway point and put a circle on here, well, we can see it. Here's our distance right here, from here to here. But if we increase that distance to here and pick up this gray, it stands out more. Even at a distance, even way off, even thumbnail, that little gray dot is more visible than this one that is the desaturated red. Strictly because that gray is further away than that red. And just like I said with value, any single thing that can be done in one direction can be done the other. For this example, what I'll do here, I'll fill all of this with the middle color, which is basically the center of the box. So we're 50% saturation, we're 50% value, and we're red. So that's right here. Most art doesn't use the entire range. I mean, some art does use the entire range of possible values that you might have, or the entire range of saturation, but very often artwork will use a very limited dynamic range, is what they call that. It's literally the range of values. So you might only use from here to here. You might not ever use any white. You might not use any black. You know what I mean? So your particular gamut or your particular choices for that palette could encompass any of this. And the same rules still apply. And so we can use any range of saturation that we want. I'm going to start at, let's say, 50% and only choose colors that are less saturated. So we're only going to pick colors here to here. And even with those limitations, we still have enough color information to make something stand out against the rest of it. And this works with any hue. You understand, we obviously had to like pick a hue to use a hue. You can't, So whether this is red or green or blue or any of these things, the actual hue at this point is not relevant, is the point that I want you to get. We can make all of these things come forward and push back and all of those things using nothing but saturation, okay? Even saturating that whole second box or desaturating it, the differences are still there. Are you with me so far? Have I lost anybody? Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. This is a very rambling tutorial, but this is a hard thing to try to get across because it's so incredibly simple, it seems complicated. All right, number 3. And we're going to get back to this wheel here in this box, I promise. But if you don't follow what I'm saying here, nothing I'm about to say is going to make sense. All right, so let's talk about hue. And before we talk about hue, there's one other thing I want to point out. On your value and saturation with your digital tools, this is effectively a scale from 0 to 100, okay? 0 to 100, actually going this way. And you can see that represented by this little number down here, that S. But as we go across, you can watch that number increase. So it's going up 20, 30, 50 at the halfway point, all the way over to 100. And so here we have 0 to 100. I guess technically this should be reversed. There. That keeps it consistent. 0, 100. So value also represented by the letter V down here. 0 all the way up to 100. Okay? So we have value 1 to 100. We have saturation 1 to 100. Okay? Now hue is a little bit different. Watch what happens if I put all this at 0. Watch the H. Okay? So I'm starting at 0 at red. Okay? We're starting at effectively red. Now as I go around, we're counting up. Okay? We're getting all the way around about a quarter of the way. We're 84, 90, around to this side, 180 on the opposite side. 270, back to 0. All right, so you guys that are know anything about geometry, there are 360 degrees in a circle. Okay, this is not a linear scale. This is a linear scale. Like it goes from 0 to 100, value goes from 0 to 100. Hue goes from 0 all the way around past the complement at 180, all the way back around to, well, technically, I think 359. Actually, it is 360. There's a 0 and a 360. So hue is measured as an angle, not a straight line distance like a ruler. This is just like a ruler, okay? You measure a ruler out in centimeters or inches or whatever. But this is an angle, okay? And that makes sense, right? Because everything's a circle. We can't measure really straight lines across this, not going this way. So the same stuff still applies though, okay? The same rules. The further away you get from your base point, the more contrast you have. So I'll start with red. And this color wheel here, I just sort of painted in the most intense version of basically every color, and so the value and saturation here are not really relevant because we're looking at these separately. These are effectively as saturated as they need to be. So if I start with red, now again, what we did last time is just not move very far, okay? So let's not move very far. Let's just slide over to purple. Now if I draw a purple circle on here, you can see it. But watch what happens if I keep going and I increase this distance going all the way around. Let's go past blue all the way over to green. And we're going to zoom out again. And what do you notice? Now we can see that purple there, but you notice how it kind of blends in a little bit with that red more than the green? That green, we can definitely see more. We can see better, I guess is the better way to put it. And the reason is the same exact reason it was up here. And we could go the other way too. If I go just slide over to like orange versus keep on going all the way around to, let's say, yellow. Again, that yellow comes forward more than the orange does because it's further away from the red. So it's the exact same principle as before. The greater the distance here, the more contrast you have. The greater the distance here, the more contrast you have. And the greater the distance here, the more contrast you have. Okay? So after seeing it put this way, do you understand how important it would be, like as a very like under-discussed skill as an artist? I believe it's probably one of the most underappreciated skills, is just the ability to measure differences between colors. It's the key to every single brushstroke you make, every color choice that you make. Should this be close to the colors that are around it? Should this be further away from the colors that are around it? It's one of the most important skills that any artist can have, is just the ability to make comparisons like this. So optimally, we would have really great tools for that. If your job is to measure the distance between two values, you just need a ruler. You know, if your job is to measure the distance between two saturation levels, you just need a straight line. And again, I'm talking about mental measurements here. I'm not talking about actually measuring anything, okay? But you can see the importance of understanding the tools you're using to measure this, okay? So why is this so hard for most people? I talked to a guy on a stream the other day. He told me that he ran out of saturation on his painting. And I understood exactly what he meant because I've been there. The problem was that wasn't that he ran out of saturation. It's that the rest of his painting was also too saturated. He wasn't using enough of the scale, okay? When that guy 2 weeks ago told me, he said, I get contrast when it comes to value. He's like, I don't really get it when it comes to saturation and hue. It's the same thing for all three. I'm going to show you why this is important and why these tools that we have for color picking actually makes this harder than it should be. So I'm just going to pick two colors. I'm going to pick like a baby blue that's pretty bright, not that saturated, and I don't know, right about there. I'm going to choose that color. All right. And now I'm going to swing around to the other side of the color wheel. And by the way, this is not a technically correct color wheel with green opposite red. This is like an RGB wheel. It's not quite the same thing. But anyway, I'm going to go pick like a red colored. And so I'm going to opposite side over here, or close to the opposite side. And I also want to make sure that it's way darker and way more saturated. And so let's say right here. Let's get a little bit more orange in there. There we go. How would we describe the difference? Well, it's darker, value-wise. It's more saturated. Going from the blue to the orange, we're cutting across this way. Now this is where it gets weird, all right? I want to see the difference in the hues. Well, if I do that though, well, I lose my position for value and saturation. So I've got a system over here that I can either measure the value and saturation together in this box, or I can look at the hue. But I can't look at all three at the same time. So when you're looking at one hue within this system, if we pick one spot on this wheel, we can measure saturation levels and value levels all at the same time in this box. So as long as the hue is the same, we can compare this saturated orange to this desaturated orange. We can see the distance between those two. And we're also comparing the value differences at the same time. But as soon as we change the hue, that changes, okay? It's this change that I want to make sure you guys understand what you're actually looking at here, because you're looking at really two different perspectives of the same system. You're looking at this box and you're looking at this ring. What you're really seeing is this color wheel, except I want you to imagine that this color wheel was a cake shape instead. Okay, think like a hockey puck or something. Okay, this isn't perfect, by the way. But if I choose to cut this cake, okay, just like you would cut a cake, and look at what would appear in the side of the cake if we looked at it, it would look just like this. It would be the same thing that you guys are seeing in your color wheel, or your color picker over here, except we're seeing a cross section of all available colors, okay? And once I figured this out, I'll be honest, like this actually made color feel simpler to me, because every color that you can imagine will fit within this particular system. Now, this is not to scale, and don't look at these angles too much. They're not perfect. But I was just trying to make a point that as we swing around this wheel, it's just like we are sliding this slice of cake that we're looking at, okay? From blue to purple to green to yellow and all the way back around. And so you can see we have value, we have saturation, and we have hue. This is the color system that you are using every day if you're a digital artist, whether you're aware of it or not. But the reason that I wanted to show this today is I really want you guys to understand that these sort of distances, you can sort of mentally measure. You know what I mean? So like you could see how you could have a desaturated blue, maybe that's here and here. So you see how like that's not a very big distance. it seems like it would be. Anytime you go from like across the color wheel between two complements, you know, it seems like a long way around if you go around this way. But that's not really how colors mix. So for example, if I want to compare like a bright saturated blue, let's say at this point, with a, you know, less saturated red that's not quite as bright, well, you can understand how this is one distance. Contrast is one measurement. The contrast between two colors is literally one straight line, as long as you're thinking in terms of this color system, which is what you're looking at here, whether you knew it before today or not. So this idea of contrast as distance is very, very powerful. It makes things a lot easier. And I'll show you what I mean. So like even within this system, we can now have, let's say, this green, and I'm going to mark these with a color so we can see them. Let's say here, and this red here. So you can see if I color pick right here, color drop that, and then pick this red down here, you can see that even though we have changes in value, we have changes in saturation, and we have changes in hue, this is still one distance, okay? If I increase that distance, keep it with the same colors, and go saturated green and even more saturated red, you know, again, these colors in isolation draw more focus than these do. Just because the distance, instead of being from here to here, it's here to here. Another way to look at this, in case this is confusing, if you have a hard time visualizing this, is to just consider this wheel. And again, I'll link this in the description so you guys can take a look at it. This is about as simple as I believe I can make it visually, is that you've got your hue all the way around, you've got saturation going toward the center, and then you have every value from light to dark and dark to light. But we can't show all of that. Obviously, we would block our own vision of the rest of this color cake here, you know. But hopefully this gives you a little bit more context about what you're actually looking at here. So how would I put this into practice? That's always the struggle, right? So I want to show you guys a few quick examples of this, and I went to the front page of artstation.com, and I'm just grabbing a few pieces of artwork from there. So this should give us some examples of this in action. And this is drawn, by the way, by Sergey Deminov, maybe. Sorry if I messed that name up. So I want you to try to focus on something. So here's the whole piece, and we have, you know, this great landscape with the mountains going in the background. We've got this little formation here. We got some red lights in there. We got some pretty green grass, a big weird tree. Okay, we got a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of stuff on this particular image, but I want you to notice a few interesting things. So, and you can try this with just your own, like, go grab your favorite work of art, whatever it is. It could be a page, a comic book frame, it could be a painting, it could be a still from a movie, it could be whatever. And if you take a, let's say, roughly, I don't know, roughly a third of this image, where the focal point of this image is, let's say it's about right there, right? Here's what I want you to notice, all right? I'm going to go outside of this area. I actually want to kind of mask off the middle. Now, what I want you to notice here, as I start picking, and I'll do this, we'll do this with the color wheel kind of close by, so you guys don't have to have your eyes bounce all over the place. So I want you to notice just how similar all of these colors are, okay? As I'm kind of running the color picker through, I mean, it's jumping around a little bit in the hue. You can see it kind of bouncing around, but it's all kind of this cool green, right? And even getting into these brighter colors, they're really not that bright. They're just a little bit, they're slightly brighter, obviously, a little bit more lighter than the rest of it, but it's still not like, it's not a bright cloud, right? This is all in a very narrow range of value, a narrow range of color or hue, and a pretty narrow range of saturation. All this entire little area lives right here, okay, in this one little area. Again, kind of keeping this in mind as well. So if we look at this in our little illustration from earlier. And again, this is not a perfect example, but let's say that whole little section, and even getting into this area, we're shifting green, but the values aren't that different. Nothing's really changing too much. So everything kind of lives here. I'm going to call this background. Now, again, this is a 3-dimensional shape. So this is actually going, over to the green and the blue. So you can imagine like a blue-green little blob of color that lives kind of over here. That's basically what we're looking at, right? Now, I've got too much stuff on the screen. Let's look to this side. So we have some, the sky is about the same color as this, or whatever this color is here. It's about the same color as this fog. That's about as bright as it gets, which is, again, not really that bright. It's about halfway. And the tree's really dark. It's got a couple little red spots in it. You can barely see those when we're zoomed out. And so this whole section is, again, not that undifferent from what we're looking at on the other side, okay? We're getting mostly dark colors, mostly cool greenish colors with all this grass over here. But again, you can see as I slide over all of these little, whatever these things are called, all of these little pixels, it's still, the color picker down there on the right is still staying in the same little area for the most part. It's all kind of bouncing around down here, right? So even this area, we're leaning a little bit more green, getting toward yellow, but we're still over here. Okay, we're on this side of the color wheel. This is more background, all right? And again, picture this as a 3D lump of color that all of these things are represented in, right? Let's flip-flop this. Let's look at what's inside. Now, what's the first thing that you notice for this compared to everything else? There's everything else. Do you notice, one, just how much brighter it is, okay? These little white areas are significantly brighter than the rest of the painting. So this is already starting to pull you in, okay? Because we don't have anything like this anywhere else on the canvas. It's only right here, okay? What else is unique to this area? Because what I'm trying to get across here, and I know this is a long, lengthy video, and I don't know, I can't figure out a way to make this any shorter. It's just a lot to talk about. And I'll probably do more videos in the future. But this red is also the only area of red that big on the canvas. What I'm trying to get across is the uniqueness of what we found in that area of focus on our canvas. We also have, and this isn't strictly related to color, but we also have bigger contrast changes that happen in a shorter amount of space. So what I mean by that is these whites right next to these darks. That light to that dark does not appear anywhere else on this canvas. Remember going back to our that original, where's it at? So there's nowhere else on this entire canvas where these lights on this end of the spectrum meet these darks. Again, very, very dark. So we've almost got the full range of value, and it only happens right in the place that the audience is meant to look. Everywhere else, the tree to the sky, the tree to the ground, this mountain to that mountain, these clouds to that mountain, all of these little things, it's not as much valued. Okay, it's these little smaller sections. We're talking about lower contrast, okay? But right here, we've got those big swings. We've got the big swings in value. We have this red, which, again, doesn't really appear anywhere else on the image. The fact that this is almost entirely unique, and I say almost because there's a little bit of red up here, but it's not enough that you can even really notice it. And it kind of plays off of this a little bit. But you can see how that would make sense. Again, given what we learned earlier, if we're surrounding this, and again, these greens don't really appear anywhere else either. So we've got these bright greens that don't appear anywhere else next to reds, which don't appear anywhere else. So to visualize all this, one more time, again, we have our background over here. Now, as we get closer and closer to the center, we're getting more and more green, these bright greens. So that little bit of contrast is already pulling us in toward this area, toward this part of the image. So even if we didn't have all these white clouds, we would still have this red, which is way over here. And it's this distance is really what makes that red stand out. It is far away from everything else on this canvas. The contrast that works can even kind of shift depending on where you are in relation to the canvas. If you're far away, we really can't see that red very well, but the contrast of the value is all that it really needs. Okay, these really bright clouds back here against the dark little tower. Even at this distance, our values are doing all the work. You know, if you can't really see that, if I put this in black and white, you will. Some of you guys are saying, didn't you cover this in the caveman color theory? Yeah, I did. This is basically just further explaining that, hopefully. Hopefully, trying to. All right, let's take a look at a different one. This is by, and I'm sorry about these names, Dao Trong Lee. And I apologize if I messed up that name. But let me copy this back into clip. So even if we ignore the shapes and what's on the page, okay, as far as like, and this is hard to do. Sometimes it helps to use like a filter, like a blur filter or distort filter. I'm going to see if I can find some kind of filter. As I just want to point out that this is more powerful than shape and line and anything else, in my opinion. But I am a colorist, I would say that, right? I've kind of taken the detail out of this one on purpose, okay? I start color picking this background. What do you notice, okay? Just looking at the hues to start off with, and looking at where they're going in their color, well, they're all in, again, a pretty narrow range on the color wheel over here. We've got greens, getting into some blues around the outside. And then there's that little bit of bright yellow toward the center. In our little color cake over here, we got greens over here. We got some dark greens. We got some blues. But everything kind of lives in this area as far as the background goes. So right off the bat, we've got very different colors on the character. Okay, even ignoring this hair for a second. All of this stuff is warm. Okay, mostly oranges, beiges, warm feeling colors. And they're all pretty like middle tone neutral, most of them, to dark. So yeah, most of those are like here. Again, we're already getting away a little bit from that background. Just by having, and I'll hide my thing here for just a second so we can see this a little bit better. So that arm's length read of this, like I said, we don't really need the details to see what's standing out on this canvas. So just by the nature of this being different colors than what's in the background, it's already started to pull our eye toward that area because it's different in the background. So that's like the wide read, right? That's the distance read, okay? So what happens if we take that important kind of like the focal point, I would say, on this. Now, there are other characters here, and I'm not discounting those, but the point I'm trying to make is still the same. This guy is closer to the background color than he is her. And so when we zoom out, he still blends more into the background than she does because his colors are not as warm. There's not as much value. It's not as bright. And it's just, again, not warm. The fact that he's not warm for the most part keeps him further back. So now, if we go into just this shape, so even within this, he's using this purple, this crazy pink purple hair color. Look where it is on this thing. It's out here, right? Out here somewhere. So this, even relative to the rest of the colors you chose, stands out even more. The distance is even further away, and this draws even more attention. So it's kind of like a two-stage, I mean, it's more than two, and I'm trying to simplify this. We're basically looking at warm colors surrounded by cool to get us to the center of the image, and then use these purples to pull us even further away from the background. And if that wasn't enough, if the purple coming off of the blue and green wasn't quite far enough, then you have this super limey green on the other, like right next to the purple. That's about as much contrast as you can have within this system, is that purple to that green. It is not an accident that they appear right on the middle of the page together. And then to top this off, we can zoom up even more. So now that we've pulled the reader's eye into this location, even here, we've got this bright blue that is completely different from everything else that you're seeing in this area. You know, so the fact that we've got this really intense blue, that's giving us more contrast. Even more contrast than the red from the rest of the canvas, or the pink from the rest of the canvas. So where the artist has objects that they want you to notice that aren't necessarily the most important thing on the canvas, they're using other contrast techniques. So like in this situation, for example, this guy is just a little darker than everything around him, so he comes forward. These glowy figures are very bright, but they're very cool though. So even with this character, you can kind of imagine if the background is down here and you don't want to shift the hue much, you just change the value. So where most of the background might be here, the value of this character is way up here. And so in this case, the contrast with the hues is not that different, but it's different because of the value. You always have options to create contrast with any three of those possibilities, whether it's hue, saturation, or value. Now, I will say one thing I've not talked about in this video, which will be another video, are shapes and patterns. Obviously, shapes and patterns have a big influence on how this stuff works, but hopefully that helps. One more? Let's look at one more. So if I had to whittle this down into one kind of mantra, I guess, that you could keep in mind as you're working, I would say that all else being equal, again, to disclaimer a little bit here, colors that are close together are going to draw less attention than colors that are far apart. And on my channel and in the future, I'm sure I'm going to, when you guys hear me use the term colors that are closer together or further apart, close together, far apart. Close together, far apart. It doesn't matter which angle you go. Two colors that are closer together are going to draw less attention than two colors that are far apart. So what do you see here? All of these colors, and I'm not actually in my app. Let me pull this in. We can see this thing from space, okay? We can see the focus of this image from, from 25 feet away if this was hanging on the wall. Light shape, dark shape, even darker shape. So to apply this slightly darker shape, which that's actually not bad where it is, but I'll make it a little bit darker. And then we have this guy who is darker than everything else. So with no detail whatsoever, this is what makes that image work. Okay? I mean, all the detail is cool. It's amazing. It has to be there. But as far as like visual focus and being eye-catching, this is the basis that it's built off of. If you have a plan, and this is my plan, okay? Light, mid-tone, dark. That's basically my plan for this image, okay? I don't think a lot of people understand, based on the questions that I'm getting, just how much easier you can make color choices for yourself if you have a plan. Because if this is my plan and I want to stick to it, and I need to decide on some colors for this building back here in the background, well, I know that I need to make sure that when I zoom out, those light colored buildings still feel light. Okay? So what does that mean? Or at least lighter than this thing in the front. So I've given myself some rails here, some bookends, I've narrowed down my color choices by knowing what I'm ruling out, okay? And so like, if I need to paint this tower, this plan dictates to me what color that tower is going to be within a certain range, because, well, it can't be this color because we can't see it. It's the same color. If I pick the same color in the background, it doesn't show up at all. If I pick the color that is a mid-tone, it starts to feel like it's part of this foreground because it's reading as a separate shape. So I need this color that I've chosen to be closer to this color than this color. So when I choose the color for this tower, I need to make sure that this light shape still seems light. So that limits me to a light tower. So when I bounce off of this, I've still got my light shape, my mid-tone, and a dark shape. I have ruled out so much of the color wheel for what color this tower is just by knowing that the average of this section needs to be light. So I've ruled out, 75% of the values in my color picker. So all you guys that ask me about how you make your color choices and how do you make color choices so fast, like by having a plan, now whether you actually draw it or if it's just in your head, which a lot of times it's in my head. But as I'm picking colors for this section down here even, I'm limited in range of what colors I should be choosing. Because remember, I need this to stay a mid-tone on average, okay? Zoomed way out, I need this to be a little lighter than him. But it can't be lighter than the sky. The sky's about as light as you can get. And if I want this edge to read at all, I need to have a little bit of contrast there. So again, what does that mean? When I start grabbing values to fill in over here, I have ruled out a lot of value choices. I've ruled out a lot of options because it can't be this bright. I can't have anything that bright down there. It messes up my entire plan. Now the white thing stands out more than it should, So if I'm doing this, even if I'm doing this in color, and it's like, well, I need a tone that's about like that. Let's say it's this right here. Well, these are actually more warmer. Let's go with some warm colors. So if I put that in here, this kind of blends with that gray. It's not really changing it very much. And let's say that I had something that was meant to be green in this area. If I just go to the color picker and go, oh, this is green, does that fit my plan? Does that appear to blend into that section? No, it doesn't. Why? It's too saturated. So I know I need to get closer to this with the color that I've chosen. So I'm going to bring it a little less saturated. What about that? Still stands out too much. Well, let's bring it in some more. What about that? We're getting warmer, starting to blend in pretty good. Maybe just a little bit more. I'd say that's about right. So if I'm coloring a guy that's wearing a green shirt, that's the green. But do you see how I got to this green? I didn't just start randomly picking stuff and putting it down and hope for the best. I had a plan. That green had to fit this shape and it couldn't be that different. So I have dictated to myself what my color choices are. And that's just this section. You understand the same thing would apply to the character. There's a lot of different amounts of detail on this guy, but they're all pretty dark, okay? They're all kind of in the same little ballpark. And so I'm hopefully the point that I'm getting across here is that if you have your plan ahead of time and you get your big shapes in place, then that is what is going to help you choose the rest of your colors because you've already done the work ahead of time. And again, this was Pavel. I don't believe I said who this was before. Pavel Candy Bay. Again, I apologize for these names. This is George Red Reef. So all of this makes a shape. All of this light makes a little bit lighter shape. How much work is that little light beam doing behind the head? If that light beam wasn't there, you wouldn't get that hard contrast through here. So something else that we're talking about, I want you to notice is I want you to look at the edges. I talked about this in one of the other caveman videos, but the edge, the difference in the colors between the silhouette of the subject and the background, look at where it's brightest. Look at where that change is the biggest. Because the difference in that color and that color is not very much. That and that's not very much. This and this isn't very much. So there's only a few places where we actually get a really strong silhouette. And it's where the darkest part of the image meets the lightest part there. At least in the background. Lightest part in the background. What really puts the cherry on this are these eyes. Those bright white eyes, just because everything else is so dark. These bright eyes are entirely unique. They're completely unique to this image. And so the fact that you have a value that bright, surrounded by a value that dark, it again is pulling you right toward the center. This has been a bit of an experiment video. Let me know what you guys think. This is like caveman cover theory, like bonus material. I don't know if I would call this an episode, but it's a lot of the same principles that I was trying to explain there, and I just keep finding simpler ways to explain it, or at least I try to. So I do thank you for watching. If you learn anything at all from this or any other videos on my channel, please check the description. I've got courses down there on coloring. I've got signed books available for purchase on my website. There's all sorts of interesting ways to support this channel down there, and I would appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. Like, subscribe, comment, consume, obey. See you in the next one.